What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cupone here. So, as cool as the idea of Pokémon from different times might be, the execution of Paradox Pokémon as a category wasn't the greatest. The fact that they can't actually evolve from anything really docks them in my eyes. But let's rank them to see every Paradox Pokémon from worst to best, mostly from a design perspective because I don't care about competitive battling nearly as much. To me, the absolute worst is Iron Jugulus. Firstly, the name is a terrible choice in a game made for children. What is that even supposed to mean? But this one is literally just a Hydreigon. A robot one, sure, but there are no design changes whatsoever. It's just the same Pokémon but with a metal exoskeleton. And since this isn't Digimon, they can't just get away with that. Second from the bottom is Iron Thorns, who isn't much better as far as just looking like the original. I give it some leeway because maybe those spikes on its back could do something like stretch out and attack, but this is also not the first robot Tyranitar that we've seen, so it's not exactly shocking at this point. But the reason it's not dead last is because adding the electric type does set it apart meaningfully from the Pokémon it's based on. Then just above that is Roaring Moon. I don't know what it is, but to me this thing is way too simple, but also over-designed. It's really hard to pull off both, but they do it somehow, with the limbs lacking enough color to be set apart, but the head and cape thing in the back trying so very hard to be cool. Maybe if we had never seen another variant of Salamence, that would be one thing, but the fact that this looks like cosplaying as the Mega version just seems redundant. Plus it just stole the typing from Hydreigon, who we already had here anyway. So I am not a fan, and I don't understand why Roaring Moon is hailed as one of the most important paradoxes out there. Now that we got our first past paradox, it's back to the future with Iron Bundle. Now, it is nice that they gave Delivered something, because it was one of the most unfortunate Pokémon really of all time. However, I don't love this concept. I mean, the robot part looks pretty good, but what's up with the fire hose attachment? I know that it's a water type, but how is that supposed to be a bag full of gifts? Unless it's from a post-apocalypse Mad Max future where water is super scarce, and that is in fact the best gift that you could get. So the design of this Pokémon is not actually that bad, but it just totally drops the ball on the original concept of this Santa bird giving presents, and for that I can't put it any higher. Next is Iron Leaves, and this is making it sound like I don't like Violet version, but that is the one that I picked. So I like the future aesthetic, I just find ones like this to be a bit boring. This is just a robot Virizion, and while that may be cool, it really only adds the metal exterior and that's it. I find the repetition of simply making a robot version of a Pokémon and naming it Iron something to be a tad bit lazy, and if it weren't for the psychic typing, Iron Leaves would be even lower. In kind of the same boat, we have another Paradox legend with Gouging Fire. Like the last one, the name is a bit too simplistic. I would like for it to be Inferno or something besides the actual type that it's based on, but also, this is just Entei with a fancy Bastiodon forehead. That might work for some people, but to me it does not scream dragon at all. I would buy Steel or maybe even Rock, but at the same time, if you want to keep it dragon like the others, you should maybe alter its body shape a bit more, as we'll see later, instead of just putting on an ornate headpiece. And right above that is Iron Crown. See, this one is still clearly Cobalion, but there are some points of interest, like the chest hair turning into a sharp piece of metal, with the whole neck jointed so that it can dip down. Also, the horns are a bit more bent this time, and they do look decent when powered up. So we are officially improving into the alright level of Paradox designs with this one. Okay, then we have Fluttermane. I don't really love this Pokémon, but I do appreciate that you can tell that it is indeed based on Misdreavus, which is rare since pretty much all Paradox Pokémon are the final stage of their line. But I would have appreciated it more if we could have got a sort of amalgamation of Misdreavus with its own evolution, since that is a severely underutilized facet of Paradox forms, but really should have been seen more. However, no, instead we just got some streamers stapled onto a Misdreavus, but I guess that's better than nothing. Screamtail I don't really have too much to say on, it's plainly just a Jigglypuff, which again is cool as it's one of the few not fully evolved inspirations, so it is pretty neat, and it proves that a tail can indeed be on someone's head. Take that, Zeraora detractors! And it also provides Smashmod or something pretty fun to do until we wait for the next one, maybe even a future Final Smash or something too down the line. So Screamtail is a pretty decent addition to a Pokemon that's had a rather consistent presence over the years. Okay, now we complete the Musketeer trio with Iron Boulder. It's hard to explain why I like this version more than the others, but I think it's really just because I don't like Terrakion as much. His original look is a bit too wide in comparison to the others, and I get wanting to have multiple body types, but Iron Boulder seems to make better use of it by being taller in the middle, both with the general orb-like shape, but also with the fins on its back. And it doesn't hurt that this is the first Rock and Psychic type since Gen 3, so I give Iron Boulder a pretty big edge over its other Swords of Justice brethren. Likewise, we now have Walking Wake. The Paradox Suicune was a surprise when announced, but it's altered just enough so that you believe that it is a dragon type. The feet are massive now, enough to let it raise up and have smaller hands, with the hair growing wild, encompassing half of its body, and the twin ribbons that Suicune has turn into actual tails to the point where it looks like a dinosaur. So the fact that it is so noticeably different starts to fulfill the promise of what Paradox Pokémon were supposed to be. And it may not really count, but next I'm going to put Koraidon. I do like this box art legend much more than either of the Galar ones, so I don't hate it or anything, but I think we can all agree that it's just a little bit too busy compared to the other one, right? Then at number 10 we have Brute Bonnet, and it's not all that different from the regular Amoonguss, but the small things start to add up, like the stubby little legs that prop it up, or the extra foliage hanging down to give it some attitude, plus there's a tail in the back. And really, I appreciate the mouth. Amoonguss has like a microscopic little hole, but on Brute Bonnet, it becomes a gaping beak to show you just how much more dangerous it is. So I think they really understood the assignment here of Paradox Pokémon and had Brute Bonnet live up to that ideal. Next we have Slitherwing, and I don't particularly love this version, but I think it does its job well enough. Taking a Volcarona and switching it up so that its wings don't work, with its most prominent features being its legs and tail, is a total reversal of what we knew, so that's a good way to take the concept. I just wish that they did something more interesting with the wings than having them stand straight up. And of course, it's a massive shame that they wasted yet another perfectly good option for a Bug and Dragon type combination. I actually prefer its alternate form, Iron Moth. As one of only 2 Pokémon to get multiple Paradox forms, the Volcarona robot could have been boring, but the disconnecting of the wings from the main body was a brilliant way to set it apart, with a slightly different overall look to have the black triangles against the glowing chevron blades. Also, the fire and poison typing doesn't really make a ton of sense to me on a robot, but I do like that we get to see it again after all this time anyway. Then we go back the other way to Sandy Shocks. I don't know why past Pokémon are the only ones that are allowed to use unevolved forms, but it is interesting to see an alternate take on how these middle Pokémon might be, with the iron shavings everywhere making it look feral and the giant curved magnets as legs. It does bring up a lot of odd lore implications, like whether or not there were ancient Magnezone as well, but mainly I appreciate having the electric and ground combination on a decent Pokémon for once, so that we can avoid ever using a Stunfisk again. Now we reach the other mascot with Koraidon. The Iron Serpent looks incredible from pretty much any angle. You've got the digitized eyes popping right next to the crackling electricity on its head, with its entire chest being made of energy and then it turns into a wheel construct. And then of course its legs being jet engines is a perfect way to upgrade a future speed demon like him. And his limbs fold in beautifully when he turns into travel mode. So this electronic space motorcycle is a wonderful way to introduce the split concept of Paradox forms in the first place, and it shows us that Cyclizar has a bright future ahead of it. So we enter the top 5 with Iron Treads. Like Koraidon, this one was sort of a poster child for Paradox Pokémon before the games came out, and instantly got across the notion of, oh, a futuristic Donphan, that's pretty cool, with its whole face being a giant screen. And I love Donphan, so having a smaller metallic version that can fully retract to create a perfect wheel to roll around on is amazing. And it really doesn't hurt that this is the only robot that's actually a steel type, so points for being consistent on the material that you're made of. Next is kind of surprising, but I've put Iron Hands. It's surprising to me because I don't really care about Hariyama, but this thing actually took an interesting direction. Instead of remaining a boring metal version of the Pokémon without any differences, Iron Hands took the future idea and said, well, they don't need the arms, right? And the answer is a resounding no. It's so easy to accept that some future technology has the capability of operating those detached hands as they're supposed to be used. It is such a small detail, but none of the other future paradoxes bothered to experiment in this way. And you can easily imagine this Pokemon shooting the hands off at a great distance, or twirling them around like a tornado. So out of all of the random Pokemon to be assigned a paradox form, I would not have picked Hariyama, but apparently I would have been in the wrong. At number 3, far above its brethren, we have Raging Bolt. I do like Raikou the best of the original 3 anyway, but that's not the sole reason that it's so high. I wouldn't have expected an increase in its neck height to make that big of a difference, but turning Raikou into a giraffe really works. Or it maybe even looks like a brontosaurus. Does that mean that they're all supposed to be dinosaurs? Well, in that case, they really failed with gouging fire, because every single angle I have seen of this thing makes it impossible to tell that it has a front horn at all. And if they wanted it to be a Triceratops thing, then the back needed to be a lot bulkier than keeping it relatively lean and speedy. But we're talking about the much better Raging Bolt, who is so tall his head is literally up in the clouds. Do you see what they did with its hair? That's brilliant! Plus, the excellent signature move is just the cherry on top. Even down to the spikes on its back with the negative space inside are an incredible touch. So I'm more than happy with the way this turned out, and I am really glad that they did not ruin one of my favorite legendaries. For number 2, I have to say Great Tusk. This was the other Donphan paradox, and I have to say, this is the main reason that I was sad that I missed out on Scarlet version. Well, that and Professor Sada. But Great Tusk is so imposing and intimidating, taking everything about Donphan and making it sharper and more lethal. I'm not sure that it could even actually roll with those giant tusks, but hey, the spikes all along its spine definitely give it extra traction to get things going. Not to mention being the first and only ground and fighting type, they really liked paradox forms having unique typings if they could help it. But the daunting Great Tusk has a lot going for it, as the absolute best of all of the past paradox forms. But of course, that leaves the best of the future to be Iron Valiant, and indeed the number 1 paradox Pokemon overall. Right away you know there's something special when you can't decide if this is a Gallade or a Gardevoir. Well, the answer is it's both. Taking aspects of 2 related Pokemon and combining them together honestly should have been the point behind half of the paradox forms anyway. Can you just imagine an Iron Snowball that's equal parts Glalie and Frostlass? Or one that puts Scizor and Kleavor together? Or even Slowbro and Slowking? Okay, maybe that one's a bad example, but that would be a way better idea than most of these forms. But at the very least, we do have Iron Valiant, who is not only cool, but perfectly blends Gardevoir's Fairy with Gallade's Fighting to give us the first ever combination of those types. But you can clearly see why it's deserving of both. And of course they even blended in elements of their Mega forms on top of that. So I don't think I'll get too much pushback for crowning Iron Valiant as the best of the special forms to come out of Area Zero. But hey, I could be wrong, I suppose. So tell me which Paradox Pokemon are your most and least favorites down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!